Okay, I've decided that instead of showing you a model to represent the extraembryonic membranes and show you the details, I wanted this labeled image here, which is much more useful. On the left, you see this is going to be like a chick, so a bird embryo, and then a human embryo. These extraembryonic membranes are common to both types of organisms. So snakes and crocodiles and birds and dinosaurs all have the same membranes. They serve slightly different functions. In a chicken egg, you're aware of what the yolk sac is. It's that big yolk food source for the chick. This green sac right here represents what's called the allantois, which is a waste sac. The little embryo swims in his own little ocean here inside of a container called the amnion, and then surrounding the egg just inside the shell is this structure called the chorion, which acts as a gas exchange membrane. So these membranes are the same membranes we have here, so they're homologous. They're from the same evolutionary source, but in placental mammals, which we are, where the embryo gets nutrients from the mother and gets rid of waste products to the mother, these membranes have taken on different purposes. So the yolk sac now, along with the allantois, form part of the umbilical cord. Mostly the allantois is responsible for this. The yolk sac is largely in humans not very functional, but it does provide early red blood cells to the embryo. The allantois serves basically as the umbilical cord, and so all the umbilical vein and arteries all basically derive from it, and it also is where you release the waste to the placenta. Speaking of the placenta, it is formed by the chorion. So the chorion, you can see it surrounding the embryo and forming these little structures here, which you remember are called the chorionic villi. This is good instance to show that this would be the decidua basalis down here, with the decidua capsularis kind of forming around this chorion, not shown. Lastly, we have the amnion, and this is that amniotic sac that if you've been pregnant, or if you know women that have been pregnant, this is what they call their water. So if your water breaks, it's because this amnion has ruptured. It provides in us the same function as it did in a chick, and that is sort of an aquatic, buoyant environment in which to develop. Now I'm going to shift gears here to a different subject, but it's also in your lab book, and that is the fetal circulation. So this is shows the circulatory system, a sort of mock-up of the circulatory system of a fetus. As you might imagine, the fetus isn't sitting there in the amnion getting oxygen by breathing, right? So the lungs are developing, but they're not working as oxygen providers. Oxygen has to come into the fetus via this umbilical cord out here, umbilical cord. The blood vessel that takes blood to the fetus is called the umbilical vein. It's going towards the heart. You might see that it merges right here with this inferior vena cava, and it kind of mingles with the hepatic portal system a little bit. This duct, this part of the vein that enters the inferior vena cava and joins with it, is called the ductus venosus. So it's the last little stretch of the umbilical vein. Once it merges with that inferior vena cava, it enters the heart the same place that it does in you, which is in the right atrium. But here we see now we're bringing in oxygenated blood from the placenta, not shown off camera, and we're mixing it with deoxygenated blood from the superior vena cava. Now, in an adult heart or in a newborn heart, that blood would go from the right atrium to the right ventricle and then off to the lungs to get oxygenated. Well, like I said, that's not occurring here. Oxygen's already provided. So what we want to do instead is, instead of separating the right and left halves of the heart to provide a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit, we want to mix them. So the fetus has a hole in between the two atria, and that hole is called the foramen ovale. It's sort of a oval-shaped foramen. We know what that is. That's a hole. So the blood from the right atrium and left atrium are allowed to mix. When the atria pump the blood to the ventricles pump the blood off from the left side to the aorta, and from the right side to the pulmonary, what are going to be the pulmonary arteries. But you can see another mixing takes place right here. So we've got this mixing through an opening called the Ductus Arteriosus. Now, when you're born, those openings have to close up. You basically sever the umbilical cord, and now because the baby's going to start breathing oxygen in the air, it wants to have the deoxygenated blood go to the lungs and the oxygenated blood go to the body, so we do separate it. This opening right here closes. So the foramen ovale becomes the fossa ovalis. I think that's in your book. Let me double check. It's not, so this is free information. It's called the fossa ovalis, and that's going to be a little sort of depression, but in between the walls of the atria. And if you've ever heard of a baby being born with a hole in their heart, this is what they're talking about, an incompletely closed foramen ovale. And then this over here collapses and forms a ligament called the ligamentum arteriosum. This ductus arteriosus, ductus venosus, I should say, basically degrades and forms a ligament that's associated with your liver, but you don't have to know that. So you have a dramatic shift from this oxygen being provided by a vein from a placenta to having to breathe on your own. Incidentally, the umbilical arteries, I may as well point out here, branch off from this, these iliac veins and, these iliac arteries, and go back up to basically get oxygenated and drop off wastes.